Senate Chamber. Signed. 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 Senate Chamber. Sound. 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 Senate Chamber. Sound.
Aye.
So, welcome members and everyone else to the 80th meeting of the Committee for Finance in the 22 to 27 mandate. As always, we are recorded, broadcast online and throughout Parliament buildings. Usual rules apply, re-phones. Agenda item 1 is apologies. We have no formal apologies. We do have a few members joining us on Zoom: Jerry Carroll, Steve Aiken, Jim Madole and potentially Harry Harvey. So we have agenda item 2 is declaration of interest. Does anyone have an interest they wish to declare?
No, thank you.
Nope. Okay. In that case, we'll move on to agenda item 3, which is Chairperson's business. 3.1 relates to the written ministerial statement on public expenditure and Treasury available funding in from 26 to 29/30. I think we actually touched on this in our last session, yes, but we are just formally putting it on the record. It's at page 6 of the meeting pack. Members agreed to seek additional information on transformation funding awards and the status of round 2 awards. I suppose it'll be helpful to see that and where the public sector transformation board funding is, including how much has been deployed thus far, and to get a detailed update. We are awaiting that from the Department of Finance, which we haven't got yet.
No, not yet. Sure.
Okay, so that's to note. Agenda item 3.2 is the a consultation event, which is now already passed, but it's in relation to the Consumer Council. It's for members to note. 3.3 relates to Charge UK. Charge UK has requested the opportunity to give evidence to the committee on the application of business rates to public EV charging infrastructure in Northern Ireland. So I think it's actually an interesting subject matter. They raised the point that it would cost a relatively small amount of money to, I think just under £80,000 is their estimate, to exempt from rates EV charging. And given, obviously, particularly events of the past few weeks, we are keen to support where possible alternatives to people having to, the pressures on the cost of fuel, etc. I think if the members are content, first of all, the clerk will liaise with the economy committee, but I think we can ask the finance department whether they have given any thought to this and whether any policies being developed in this area. Members are content. Okay. 3.4.
Just on that, it's just to know what they're talking about. So 10 public charging sites. So Are these literally places that are just dedicated to that? I mean, are they talking about every time you get a charging point, like as part of a garage or whatever? I presume they're talking about places that are dedicated to it.
I don't know is the short answer.
As part of a framework, the other it occurs, Chair, that it's also a DFI matter. I think they are the ones who run the.
Can I just hold on there? We've got a member, one of our members who's dialing in remotely is not on mute, and for some reason they're being broadcasted. Dr. Aiken, Steve, if you're able to just mute yourself, just because. Thank you. That's helpful. Cheers. Go ahead, Mark.
Sorry, so they're responsible for the theoretical public network, so it might be worth also finding out what they're doing too, Chair.
Yeah, so I think we should forward it both to the Economy Committee and the Infrastructure Committee, and as we said, if members are content that there will be, that there will be a conversation between the clerks, the Economy and Finance, to establish whether, and indeed probably infrastructure, to establish whether evidence, one or more of the committee should be taking evidence or seeking further. But I do think it's worth us just asking the department specifically whether any thought has been given to the exemption of EV charging sites from rates. They say it's a relatively small policy, and they have estimated the cost. Presumably they've just added up the bills that those sites have received. Members are content with that. 3.4 relates to recruitment of human rights commissioners to the Human Rights Commission. That's job ads. It's there unless members, it's there for members either share with interested parties or for information. It's page 12 of the meeting pack. 3.5, senior civil service moves. Members, the letter from the Permanent Secretary of the Finance Department is at page 4 of the tabled pack, and it indicates that two senior officials from the Department of Finance, Joanne McBurney and Sharon Smith, will be moving on to become permanent secretaries at two different departments. So congratulations to them. We will have Joanne McBurney in front of us later on. We'll be able to congratulate her in person, but obviously it will mean that there is senior personnel movement at the top of the Finance Department, including two quite important posts. So we will want to, I suppose, understand from the department that what their plan is. I'm just bring up the table pack. What their plan is for recruiting replacements. Does it say?
There's an updated table pack went out, Chair. Hang on, I'll show you what they.
Trying to find out what
if they. You maybe don't have the updated one open. So there's the letter there, Chair.
Yeah, it doesn't say when.
What we think.
Oh yes, we do. Yeah,
we think the Joanne and Joanne certainly.
1st of June 26. Yeah. But their recruitments will be going.
So their replacements have been named.
They have the named in there. Okay.
So we have Deborah Brown coming in to replace Joanne. Yes, we have Paul Grocott coming in to take on some.
We talked about this yesterday and clearly forgetting.
No, you're all right.
Okay, that's fine.
We know who they are, and they're existing.
Okay.
Existing three.
Great. Well, we look forward to hearing from them.
Some are promoted. Sorry, Deputy Chair.
Deputy Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think that just wanted to say that I think that it's really welcome that the Permanent Secretary has written to the committee to let us know of this whenever there are moves. I know we'd always raised things in the past about movements of senior civil service and being kept aware of it. So I just think that it's very welcome, and I wonder, given the significance and seniority of the role, the committee would be in agreement to write to Joanne and Sharon to thank them for their work and wish them well on their new roles.
I think that's fair enough. Yeah, I think given they've both been before the committee on several occasions, or many occasions in the case of Joanne, and I think you're right that it is it's a good thing that the department, the Perm Sec, wrote to us about this. If members are content, we will send that letter. Yeah. Now, one other item of Chairperson's business I just want to raise, members, is just in relation to some of the. We've obviously had lots of discussion in the last couple of weeks on cost of living, including potential measures on fuel. I think it would be helpful for us to find out if the Finance Department has had any specific contact with the Treasury and whether any request has been formally made by the Minister in relation to that, and what the latest they've heard from the Treasury is. Obviously, this is moving around quickly. We know there have been calls at a political level, but if members are content, I think it would be helpful to find out what the department, what contact the department has had, if we're content with that.
Joanne should be able to speak to that.
Yeah, we can also ask Chairperson, yeah. Okay, now members, we're going to move on to draft minutes of the meeting on 25th of March, 2026. So, members, they're at page 14. If you're content that they are a true reflection of the meeting, I'll sign them. Content? Yep. Okay. Agenda item 5 is matters arising. We've got a fair chunk to get through because, obviously, we were off eating eggs and doing other things, hopefully serving our constituents as well. 5.1 is correspondence from the Minister on the Fiscal Council bill. The Minister has written to us to thank us for our scrutiny of the Fiscal Council bill, which has not yet been scheduled for consideration act, but will be soon.
No, it should be soon.
And obviously we will have it. And obviously we do have consideration stage next week of the Administrative and Financial Provisions Bill. So I would just say the testament, particularly, I would say to our team, but we had to do very detailed scrutiny on both of those. There will be probably amendments to both of them which need to be debated, and I think hopefully we've added a bit of value for the Assembly in terms of our scrutiny. And I think we've, important to say, because sometimes we don't always make a point of this, we came in under ahead of schedule.
Ahead of time, Chair, yeah.
So we can't be. It's proven that extension of committee stages do not necessarily lead to
not a target.
Deadline, exactly, aren't necessarily targets, not deadlines. And I don't think anybody could accuse us of not being exhaustive in relation to both bills. Right, 5.2 is going to start a load of Dallow extracts from the 11th of February meeting. Well, one from 11th of February and then a few from the 11th of March. So, page 29 of the meeting pack, we requested clarification from the Department of Finance on whether they would be making a further response to the NIAO report on resourcing of the civil service, which is obviously germane to our inquiry, and we have effectively become the PAC. That's probably breaking some standing order by saying we're becoming the PAC. We're following up on the NIAO report, and we had asked the department whether there would be a full formal response. They've set out a response to us, effectively saying that the people strategy 25 to 30 is the response, but at Annex A they have given us a bit of a run through what they say their responses, and there's a couple of points I just wanted to draw attention to. If I can get myself to the right page.
5.3.
Yeah. So, just at Annex A, they go through a summary of key actions and timelines on civil service workforce renewal. And then at Annex B, there are a couple. They talk through recommendations that they accept and don't accept. Now, there's a couple of things I just want to draw members' attention to. Obviously, we'll be talking about this further in relation to our inquiry in this area, but one of the recommendation 1, if you go to recommendation 1, it says the outstanding recommendations from the 2020 NIAO report and the 2021, and so this is their response, but the original point, the original recommendation from the Audit Office relates to responsibilities and clearly defined accountability lines. Now, the response of the department is, and it was kind of alluded to before, but we have it now in black and white. It says clear responses have been established for delivering the people strategy. The next board holds collective responsibility, with each member leading a specific key initiative and being held to account through their annual performance review. The head of the civil service has established a people committee to provide strategic direction, monitor progress, and oversee risk management. So I think it's worth us considering whether we are satisfied with responsibility being shared by the NICS board. Collective responsibility is not necessarily the same thing as there being a single owner, albeit later in the response. It does say the people strategy sits with a single senior officer, who I presume is either Jill or Catherine.
Yeah, well, ultimately reporting to the Permanent Secretary.
Yes, reporting to the Permanent Secretary of Finance. Again, it just reinforces the slight question and my concern about reporting lines on civil service transformation, because at no point does it say here the head of the civil service is responsible for this. It's implied, but it's not explicit. The next board has collective responsibility for the people strategy, and the senior responsible owner for the people strategy is a single senior officer who's not the head of the civil service. I think that's a question we need to just probe a bit more, members. I also would like to see, in case we haven't seen it, it may have been somewhere else in what was submitted to us for the last session before Easter, the detail on which member of the next board leads each key initiative. I'm not sure whether we've seen that. We might have, but it might be buried somewhere, and I haven't.
It would be useful to have an organogram of some kind.
Yeah, I think given the slight complexity of that explanation, essentially I would like an organogram. If members are content with that, because I was just a wee bit concerned with some of what's in there. Not necessarily concerned with what's in there, but just concerned with the way it's described and the dilution of responsibilities. Yep, Deputy Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and I would agree with what you're saying, because on a separate Public Accounts Committee report, whenever I was on that committee, we had the major capital projects, and one of the fundamental issues recurring as to why things continued to fail was that everything kept being referred to the next board, which again, it was this collective responsibility of permanent secretaries, you know, around the table talking about each other's projects, but nobody ultimately, as you say, having a clear line of accountability for delivering right the way through it. And in the session before Easter, whenever we were talking about it, I had raised it with them, as well as it's the feedback that I'm getting when I'm trying to ask questions, that the Department of Finance, the shared service for HR, their understanding of what they're accountable for and responsible for is very different to what individual departments think that they're responsible for. So ultimately the HR policies are just floating around in the middle. Exactly. And everybody's, the individual departments are saying the shared service HR is doing this, whereas they're saying whenever we're speaking to them, it's up to every individual department to manage that. Exactly. So those clear accountability chains are missing. I think this is an emerging concern, yeah, and we want to test this in our hearings, which is who is actually ultimately responsible. Yeah. The Department of Finance, it has policy responsibility, but it's owned by the next board, but the people who are responsible are line managed by the Permanent Secretary of the Department of Finance, who I'm sure and would believe is committed to this agenda. But if it's reporting into the next board, but the accountability lines are going through a separate kind of dotted line connection, and then there's this question, as the Deputy Chair says, of who owns each department is referring back to next HR. But next HR is saying, well, it's each department. We just need to understand whether this is a fundamental structural problem that needs to be, that we need to test. But we need to test that proposition in our inquiry. So it's just to raise that for people's attention, members. Right, 5.4. So if members are content that we note that and incorporate that into our evidence for the inquiry, and I think those recommendations are going to be important evidence for us going forward when we're hearing evidence about the committee. Now the Dallow extract. Dialogue extracts follow from 11th of March 2026. Page 39 of the meeting pack, the committee had previously voiced concern about the disparity between recent valuations and sale amounts. The department has provided a response setting out details of how valuations are made, as well as how such valuations change as a result of reviews. A table has also been provided in current property disposals, highlighting market values and, where applicable, agreed sales prices. Finally, there are details of two current DOF assets for which the asset owner is considering bids via the internal market, meaning that it's the internal civil service, public sector market, by another civil service, public sector body or third sector organisation. There's also, members, helpfully written question response to the Deputy Chair that's at page 7 of the tabled pack, item 5.21, which highlights disposals under the strategy and receipts of 7.95 million for 25-26 financial year. So I'm going to bring in the Deputy Chair at this point. Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just on this one, I just wonder, have we any scheduled briefings in and around the progress of, you know, the management of the estate and the strategy?
Yes,
we do. Because I just, whenever we're looking at this and we're staying on top of the disposals and we have a lot of questions around those, yes, that's one thing. But following our visit out to Land and Property Service, I'm just keen to know, have they paused and revisited it, given the mapping of the strategic asset management unit, because I remember we had a lot of queries as to whenever you pull that together for the whole of Northern Ireland, whenever you were looking at all of that before they're continuing under what they're doing in terms of dispose, and have the pause to think. I think Deirdre had asked questions around, like the social housing pockets. Like, are they doing anything to do with that? Because I thought it was really, really interesting when we were out there, and we had asked a lot of those things. So I just wonder, are the two things aligned?
Well, yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think there are, and there's also that question about social housing and, getting more people in to live, for example, in Belfast city centre, and whether they're aligned to. And indeed, if there's a social value obligation that interacts with that, I think there's important questions to ask. Okay, members are content? Happy enough? Yeah. 5.6, Dallow read out response relating to SEUPB accounts. That's at page 42 of the pack. We previously, there were concerns raised about the length of time it takes to certify SEUPB accounts. The department's come back to say they should be complete in May 26. The accounts will then be laid in the Assembly and the Oireachtas. Members are content to note. 5.7 relates to DP Generalist post recruitment. It's page 43 of the meeting pack. Members had voiced concerns about generalist recruitment to the civil service in light of previous recommendations. I mean, really going back to the Cochrane inquiry around reliance on generalist appointments. The department advises that the recent recruitment is designed to stabilise delivery in critical grades, and that the majority of the 131 declared vacancies are existing funded roles currently backfilled by temporary or agency arrangements. Members will recall that officials also addressed this query during the oral briefing on the Next People strategy just before Easter. To note, unless anybody wants to come in on it. Yeah, Deputy Chair, yeah.
Yeah, I just wonder again if it who or where specifically is, but I can forward on. I got a response to a written question, I think it was yesterday, which kind of is a wee bit conflicting with this response that we've got here in this file, because I specifically asked how many vacancies right across the civil service are currently being filled by somebody who's on a temporary promotion, who's in by agency, and they've come back to say they've no way of knowing that, yet they're saying here that most of these are currently being backfilled by temporary or agency arrangements. So I can forward across that question, but just somehow that we can build that into our inquiry, because surely that's something that should be monitored centrally in some way.
We can monitor that, Chair, at the Assembly, and I appreciate the Assembly is a much smaller organisation, but that should be data that we can get. We can go back to the department and ask around that. You share that, Deputy Chair?
Now we're going to go on to Dallow extract responses from the 18th of March meeting, or things that we asked on the 18th of March. The first one relates to duty relief exemption. Committee previously asked the Department of Finance for any information or update in relation to duty relief exemption for small parcels. The Department has indicated, since it's not a devolved matter, there's no further information in relation to this. So that's to note. 5.10 relates to the Alternative Mourne Gateway project. That's at page 48 of the meeting pack. The committee asked the department for any information or updates in relation to the Alternative Mourne Gateway project, which was discussed with the Tourism NI board on the 19th of March. Sorry, members, if I didn't say this is at page 40, yeah, I did say it's at page 48 of the pack. So this was discussed with the Tourism NI board on the 19th of March. The department stated this alternative tourism proposal will require a new outline business case to be developed by the council, and it will initially be considered for approval by Newry, Mourne and Down District Council and the Belfast Region City Board prior to submission for consideration and approval by Tourism NI's Finance Board and Casework Committee. The department has agreed to provide further updates regarding the alternative proposal and ensure the committee is informed outside the usual quarterly process in line with its previous commitment. I'm not entirely clear from this whether the elected officials in Newry, Mourne and Down District Council have been briefed on this. Maybe just the ones who are involved in the city deal, but it's not entirely clear from that. So anyone to come in on that? I don't know if the Deputy Chairperson to come in. One small, slightly pedantic note, they've got the name of the... We were asking about this because it was in a newspaper article. They've got the wrong newspaper title. I like to just be pedantic and point things out like that, but in terms of attention to detail, in the response to us, the wrong title, but in any case. Yes, that, my members, I'm just going to raise just the clerk's drawn my attention because it's worth putting on the record. There's brief, local news outlet has been briefed that the Secretary of State will attend a Stormont executive meeting tomorrow where the executive will discuss the financial situation, including the multi-year budget and related matters. So that's rather unusual. I think we will seek to find out. Maybe perhaps Joanne McBurney might be able to shed more light. I think that's interesting.
McBurney may be able to shed some light.
She may be able to shed some light. I'd like to personally be interested to know who initiated that invitation. Rather an unusual thing for a devolved executive to invite in to a formal executive meeting a UK minister, but we'll see. We can ask about that. Okay, so now members are going to go back to matters arising. We've talked about the local growth. We haven't talked about local growth. We've talked about the Mourne Gateway matter. There's a related item at page 52 of the meeting pack, which is a City and Growth Deal update. There are updates relating to the Causeway, Coast and Glens Growth Deal. Signing is now expected in April. Updates are also provided in relation to Mid-South West Growth Deal. So we're going to do now, members, several related items which all relate to the local growth fund. So I'll run through them, and then any discussion that we require can happen at the end. So, first of all, 511 is 51 of the meeting pack, and that is an update from the Department of the Local Growth Fund. This was circulated in hard copy at the committee's last meeting. At that time, members agreed to write to the Minister of Finance again. So that last meeting happened just on the 1st of April. It was the last meeting before the Easter recess. And the response was circulated in hard copy at that time. It's at page, the next related item is at page 8 of the tabled pack. It's a response from the Minister. The Minister states that despite representations from various parties, the approach of the UK Government has not changed. Responses from the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister, that's Darren Jones, reiterate that there will be no change to the capital heavy, i.e. the emphasis on capital in the fund over resource. The Minister highlights actions taken by the Executive in an effort to reverse the UK Government's approach to the fund. The Minister indicates that his officials are engaging with the NIO and Executive departments about how best to use both elements of the fund in due course. Departments have also been asked to assess whether support could be made available to mitigate the impact of NHCLG cuts, but this is in the context of an extremely challenging budgetary position. A further related item is a response from a minister at NHCLG. It's got a very elaborate title, which I won't go through in detail, but it's at page 75 of the meeting pack. The Minister indicates that while they understand the committee's concerns about the capital and revenue split and the impact on the voluntary and community sector, they highlight the local growth fund was never designed to replicate the UK SPF on a like-for-like basis and should be understood in the wider context of the spending review and autumn and spring statement budget settlements for devolved departments. They also highlight the Northern Ireland Executive settlement of 19.3 billion, as they do, and they talk about the various additional bits of resource made available to the Executive in recent months. The Minister recognised the transition to a new funding model with a different balance of resource and capital brings changes that will affect which projects can be supported. In recognition of this, the UK Government has put in place several mitigations for Northern Ireland. This includes enhanced flexibility to use the Pride in Place funding for local growth priorities, adding over 11 million of additional fund. The deadline for expenditure of UK SPF funding from 31st of March 26 has been extended to 30th of September 2026 in order to give greater flexibility to maximise spend and address any unexpected last-minute delays. Alongside this, NHCLG is commissioning economic and activity projects for 26-27 through a direct closed commissioning process, which will reduce the administrative burden to the sector. This will provide continuity of provision from April. My members, the Secretary of State, it also says the Secretary of State, they mentioned Peace Plus, it says the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, the Parliamentary Secretary of State, Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Northern Ireland met with representatives of SCUPB, NICVA and CO3, that's the Third Sector Chief Executives Organisation, on the 5th of March to explore the various options that may be available, and this work is ongoing. Looking forward, work led jointly with NHCLG, Northern Ireland Office and NICS will explore delivery approaches for the Local Growth Fund from 27 year onwards, i.e. 27-28 onwards. Cross-sector engagement will form an important part of this process. A further and final related response from the Minister at MHCLG to our correspondence of the 20th of March can be found. It relates many of the same things that the other correspondents have relayed. So members, where this brings us is that the last time we met was on the first day of the new financial year, and members, I think, out of frustration with the situation that community and voluntary sector organisations have been left in, wanted to write once again to the Finance Minister asking whether for any final update, including what efforts were being made by the Executive to step in and support organisations affected, and indeed finally whether the UK Government would have a last-minute reconsideration of the situation. The answer to both of those things was no, and I think it's important to put on the record the immense frustration of the community and voluntary sector. Certainly, as a representative, I heard deep and profound frustration with the initial decision by the UK Government, and it has to be said, frustration with the Executive's response, which many people, I think, felt was I think an effort to tell people to kind of take your complaints to London, which there may have been some justification to, given the UK Government made and slightly inexplicably maintained this decision around the funding split, but the consequences will have to be dealt with by the devolved government. If additional people are pushed into, so people have already been made redundant and now are redundant, programmes have either wound down or shut, and the consequences, including increased economic inactivity and probably reliance on the benefit system, will have to be met locally. So those are frustrating outcomes. It is also worth saying that we've never had an answer to the question, what happened to the money the Executive saved 2-3 years ago, whenever the European Social Fund came to an end, and therefore match funding was no longer required. Around 30 million went back into the Executive coffers and has, I think, been used to pay for other pressures. I accept there are other pressures, but we've never been told exactly where that money went. So I just wanted to put on the record deep frustration because all of the community and voluntary organisations I've spoken to were deeply frustrated at the attitude of the UK Government, the initial decision, but many of them were also frustrated, and they put it on the record with the attitude of the devolved Executive and ministers here, whose priority seemed to be to make sure that London got the blame rather than working to solve the problem. I just thought I'd put that on the record. Anybody else wish to come in? Brian Kingston.
Well, in this letter from the Minister, a lot of it is just, again, not taking responsibility for the restrictions that they put on the local growth funds split. But the last paragraph on page 75, is it she, is it? I'm not sure. Is it he or she?
Yeah, yes, she.
She talks about enhanced flexibility to use pride in place programme funding for local growth priorities, and then, adding over £1 million in additional revenues funding between 2026 to 29. So, is that revenue funding as part of the pride in place? It's just to know what that means. And again, does the pride in place funding, is that controlled by the Executive or is it controlled by MHCLG? It's just to know, is this a potential source for additional support for the economic inactivity projects?
Members might recall what happened here locally was, instead of having pride of place as a separate fund, that the money that would have been allocated for that is now just within our local growth fund. Elsewhere, Scotland, Wales, England, they still have pride of place as a separate block of funding, so that funding was just made part of the local growth fund here, but it doesn't alter the split capital and resource. So, for example, say, and it's a figure off the top of my head, there's 10 million pride of place, that's just in our local growth fund. It's not been set aside as a separate thing, because it has a different set of criteria and so on. So effectively what that means is there's more money in the local growth fund here for local growth projects rather than pride of place, which is a very specific, slightly different set of criteria. So it will still apply elsewhere in the UK, but here that money is allocated as part of local growth fund.
And is that on a 70-30 capital?
Still the same capital resource split.
So this sentence means this enhanced flexibility to use pride in place funding for local growth priorities. The 11 million in additional revenue funding between 2026 to 29 is 30%.
It's already being counted as our local growth fund anyway. It's just, it's all local growth fund rather than that bit being carved off as pride of place or pride in place. So that's where the description of flexibility comes from, that all of the money is in one pot, therefore the local growth fund criteria are being applied, rather than the pot being sectioned off with part of it being pride in place and a different set of criteria being applied, that would mean even tighter impact on the services and so on that the community and voluntary sectors already providing.
Okay.
Which, yeah, so it's flexibility, and it's a bigger pot altogether with more specific criteria to local growth fund, but it hasn't actually changed the quantum that's available.
Jerry Carroll.
Makes sense.
Jerry Carroll.
Jerry, can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you now?
Yeah, thanks. No, you said somebody else before me, but happy to come in. No, Chair, my thoughts would be quite similar to yourself. I mean, obviously there's questions for the British government, but I think a lot of the groups that sort of I engaged with and party colleagues, there was a frustration that there was no real answers or attempt to set up emergency funds in the act of and the likelihood that the British government didn't act. You know, and I raised this before, but if you take the industrial de-rating, so the proportion of industrial de-rating that goes to large companies, the big multinationals, that is almost pound for pound the same figure that was lost or being affected by the local growth fund, and there was no real response or addressing at that point. So yeah, I would concur with the criticism you made of obviously the British government, but also the inaction of the executive on this.
Okay, members are content, I think, with the at this stage. I'm not sure what more. Certainly we will keep on this, and we will want to know more about the local growth fund as it develops from 26 or 27, 28. I would just say there are people who've been laid off and programs are shut down, and there's going to be increased economic inactivity, and there's going to be hardship. The British government have helped create that situation, but the executive have basically said, go and talk to the British government, and I don't think that's particularly an edifying response. I think lots of people in that sector are frustrated by it. We'll move on. Okay, so 5.13, members, we've covered off all the local growth fund for now. 5.13, update and member appointments in relation to Fiscal Council. 54 is correspondence from the Department advising the Committee of the terms of appointment of the Independent Fiscal Council. Professors, so the terms of appointments have been extended for a further 3 months until the 31st of March 2027, by which time we would hope that the Fiscal Council bill will be an act and have royal assent. And we hope that we'll be getting lots of updates like this, or updates like this is appropriate per what we've asked for in the bill and the EFM and the schedules. So Professor Alan Barrett, Dr. Esmond Burney and Maureen O'Reilly have been extended for a further 3 months. Sir Robert Choate will also continue in his role as Council Chair. So that's to note for now. We'll have at least another year of the Council who have been, I think, performed their role very effectively thus far. 5.14, Communities Committee, Children's Services Cooperation Act, NI 2015 and pooled budgets. The Communities Committee has received a response from the Department of Finance in relation to pooled budgets. The Department indicated that guidance and updated guidance was recently issued to finance directors in relation to pooled budgets. Confirmation is also given that guidance and pooled budgets related to related to ALBs as well as departments. I think this may be one that we come back to. The Children's Services Cooperation Act is actually a very interesting piece of legislation, and I think it's right that the Communities Committee look at it. I think there's a general question about the use of pooled budgets given our the widespread issue we have with siloed working, but we may want to come back to that at some stage. 5.15, Committee for the Executive Office Ending Violence Against Women and Girls. That's page 59. There's courtesy correspondence from the Executive, the TO Committee, to the Minister of Finance requesting an update on the Department's work under the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls framework. And just on that, members, I should note that I had a recent engagement or conversation with an organisation called Ending Economic Abuse, who are doing very interesting work in this area in terms of broadening out definitions, and it may be something worth bringing to the committee for future discussion, because I think there's work that they would like to see happen within financial services here in the north that is not happening here in the way that it is happening across the water, and it may be something that we can raise as a committee. So I might bring that back at a later date. 5.16 relates to the NI Scrutiny Committee in the House of Lords and their follow-up inquiry and strengthening Northern Ireland's voice in the context of the Windsor Framework. That's on page 63. As a courtesy, we've been copied into correspondence from the House of Lords NI Scrutiny Committee to the Secretary of State and the Minister of the Cabinet Office in terms of evidence gathering on business support in the Windsor Framework. To note,
Chair, I should have declared a declaration of interest in that one, but yeah,
yes, you're on
They've got you. Yeah.
Yes, that's fine. Yep, you're on the Windsor Framework Committee. Thank you, Steve. 5.18 is from the FST to the Treasury to the Northern Ireland Scrutiny Committee on the removal of duty relief. We discussed this already in an earlier item. We've been copied into further correspondence on that. So, Brian Kingston.
Yep, I didn't want to come in until we had that item of correspondence, the reply from the Secretary of the Treasury. First of all, I think it's very helpful that we have been copied in on this correspondence, and I hope we could write back and maybe just express that appreciation to the House of Lords Northern Ireland Scrutiny Committee. It's helpful that we've been copied in.
We do acknowledge whenever they, I think we as a court, we acknowledge them, and they do copy us into lots of things.
But no, it certainly is helpful. I mean, I thought when we forwarded on the previous correspondence to the department, I thought their curt reply was disappointing. I know it's not, they'll say it's not their responsibility, but this is a matter which actually will affect every resident in Northern Ireland. The removal of the threshold for low value imports, as the EU calls it, and particularly for items which all of us at some stage will order things online. And the idea of having to pay customs duty obviously is an affront to our place within the UK internal market. I attended the UK-EU Parliamentary Partnership Assembly last month, and I heard Maros Šefčovič talking about protecting the internal market, and when I got to speak I said, well, he's talking about the EU internal market, but I and others will continue to speak about the EU not respecting the UK internal market, and this is another example. I know this is a EU-wide thing that they feel small value parcels are being abused, but to have them applying to people ordering goods from GB, and not only having to pay customs duties, but having to pay a €2 handling fee is an affront. Now the reply that we have at 5.18 is helpful. It clarifies their estimate that 75 to 85% of all parcels moving from GB to Northern Ireland do so using the UK carrier scheme or the UK internal market scheme established under the Windsor Framework, so will not be affected. However, that potentially leaves up to 25% of orders will be affected. So that is of huge concern. I welcome the work of that. The Scrutiny Committee in trying to minimise the impact on consumers and businesses, which we should all be part of. So, I mean, I think we should be expressing an opinion on this. I think we should be, can we agree a position of opposing the proposed removal of this threshold of €150 that goods below that, in particular those ordered within the UK, coming from GB, that we formally record our opposition to the removal of that threshold, that it should not be applying, and a handling fee should not be applied. I understand the EU wants to protect its internal market, wants to keep an open border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. So Northern Ireland people cannot take all the pain to facilitate that. And that's been our position from the start. Okay. And imposing these charges, which don't respect the UK internal market. So that's my proposal, that we should write back to the Financial Secretary, to the Treasurer, Lord Livermore, or the official who wrote to us, Spencer Livermore.
Yeah, he's the Lord's
that is him. Apologies indeed. Formally opposing the removal of this threshold in relation to goods coming from GB.
I need to bring other members in. Steve Aiken.
Yeah, thank you. We've already had this in front of the Windsor Framework Committee, or I've tried to raise it for the Windsor Framework Committee, and now the Alliance members or the Sinn Féin members decided to take this forward. I would fully support Brian in his position, and it's a very invidious additional taxation. I've referred to this previously in the Assembly from the floor when I called it the Alliance tax. but it is something the rigorous implementers have not been trying to stop. And I think it's just the 25% is just the start of it, because I don't think people really understand where the thresholds lie and what the implications are. But that's my view. But I would support Brian's perspective.
I appreciate members will want to give their views on this, and I'll give any member the opportunity to share their view on it. I would say a couple of things. First of all, it's important to say this is not the purview of this committee, but we have been copied into it as a courtesy. I don't believe it would be within the. I don't believe it would be really within the bandwidth of this committee to write to. Perhaps not bandwidth. It's not really the committee's prerogative to write to express opposition to the Treasury Minister, because that's not the role of this committee. We've been copied into this as a correspondence. We could, I think it would be within order to write back to the relevant Lords Committee who've copied us into this to note that we, that members on the committee have an interest in this, and we appreciate being kept in the loop. A formal proposal has been put. Before we kind of go to crystallise that, I would say my own view is that it would I would not be comfortable with supporting a letter to anyone basically which didn't reflect the initial cause of all this, which is Brexit, I'm afraid, Brian, and the truth is that the consequences are things that we need to keep abreast of, and I have no issue discussing them and us being kept in the loop. It will affect parcel holders, but if the case is, if our interest here is ensuring that householders and people who order things online, and I'm sure everybody nowadays orders things online, including lots of things that come from Great Britain, I would want to understand whether some of the moves being made to improve alignment between the UK and EU, and what discussions are being had at a UK-EU level in terms of greater alignment could help to solve some of these problems, and should the committee be taking a view on that?
Yeah, well, and that's covered. They also helpfully copied us in on the report, Strengthening Northern Ireland's Voice in the Context of Windsor Framework, which again is a very interesting paper, and it refers to that. I mean, the implications of wider discussions.
Again, we're copied in this because it's not really the responsibility of this committee. We scrutinise the Department of Finance.
Yeah, I still feel there's value in us supporting the Treasury in opposing the removal of this threshold.
I think it would be quite weird if we wrote to the Treasury supporting them on this, and I'm not sure actually I'm not sure supporting them is quite what you mean, because I don't think they're coming to the same conclusion you are. But whenever we have lots of other things with the Treasury that we are deeply frustrated with. But anyway, I'm going to bring in other members to give their view. I think first was Gemma Dole and then Jerry Carroll.
Thank you, Chair. And similar to yourself, I wouldn't be supporting this either. I find these conversations incredibly frustrating around the consequences of Brexit and the people who are raising these issues, similar to Local Growth Fund and now this. So no, I won't, and Deirdre's not there, but I know we won't be supporting writing to the Treasury on those lines.
So, Jerry Carroll.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I have nothing in principle against contacting the Treasury. To be honest, Chair, I haven't had a chance to look at this in detail or discuss it with my party colleagues. So maybe a better proposal would be to, if there's agreement on raising it generally, to have a draft letter and come back to it next week and have a vote on it. But
I'm going to make a proposal.
I haven't had the chance to kind of discuss it or look at it in great detail, to be perfectly honest, Chair, and I'm just uncomfortable voting anyway on it for that reason.
Okay, Owen Tennyson.
Thank you, Chair. And I mean, I agree with your assessment that this isn't the remit of this committee, just as it hasn't been to date the remit of the Windsor Framework Committee, because we haven't actually received formal notification. And so we haven't had the ability to consider things like an inquiry into the outworkings of this, and that is often misrepresented, as it has been again today. I mean, I think the first thing to stress is that the intention of this change is actually to discourage consumers from purchasing small parcels from sites like Temu and Shein, often from China, and it's intended to support our local businesses and to protect them from competition from abroad. We obviously have a very specific circumstance in Northern Ireland where GB is now outside completely of the EU, and we align with some EU rules, and that throws up complications. However, the UK government is also consulting on a similar charge to be applied externally, and so I think the best position to be in would be for the UK and EU to come to a common agreement, or for a customs union to be formed, in which case there is no risk of any charges applying to any movements in the IRC. And I think that's where most of us want to get to, is where there's no friction whatsoever, and that is often misrepresented, as it has been again today. Though I have to say, it is interesting that people seem to have come full circle. Because as someone who sits in the Windsor Framework Committee, the same voices who told us 8 years ago that we couldn't possibly align dynamically with the European Union now argue that that's exactly what should happen in order to prevent friction in the IRC. So I am up for serious conversation about this. There are solutions, we have presented them, but I'm not really interested in these kinds of stunts where people want to draw committees back into Brexit wars of attrition with no real solutions or no real answers about how they want to address the issues.
Members, I'm going to make a proposal, which is that it's not to say that the issue of how parcels are handled is not of interest or importance to people. It is, of course it is. First of all, it isn't directly the remit of this committee to be taking formal positions. There are lots of issues people might feel strongly about and might want the committee to take formal positions on. We don't do that because it doesn't necessarily expedite or improve the functioning of the committee, particularly on issues that aren't really within the core work programme of this committee. So what I would suggest is we write back to the Lord Scrutiny Committee, who have copied us into this, saying that there is a level of interest in the committee with divergent views, and that we ask to be kept abreast of developments and conversations between the UK government and the committee on this matter. Are members content with that?
I make an amendment to that, Chair.
You can make a separate proposal that we can then, if you wish, Brian. But so first of all, if you what I'll do is take your proposal, and then we'll try and get a view from the committee as to where they are. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, well look, I'll amend what I was proposing earlier. I'm looking at the wording in the letter here from Treasury. So I think we should express, you can use whatever word you want, concern or strong concern about the proposal to remove the threshold, and I would propose that we should be opposing the removal of the threshold. And I think that should be an agreed position in the interest of the people of Northern Ireland, who we represent, because of the consequences of it, and that we should support Treasury in its efforts to, what's the end of the sentence, to ensure we can minimise any potential impact on consumers and businesses in Northern Ireland.
Okay. I think those are quite different things. So just in the interest of giving clarity, can I ask members, so first of all, my proposal is that the committee writes to the House of Lords Committee saying that there is a significant level of interest on the committee with divergent views, and we would ask to be kept abreast of developments. Can I have people to indicate their content with that?
If we make that a vote, then Chair, so ayes in favour of that.
So ayes are.
So that was yourself, Owen, Gemma, Jerry, and Steve.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
aye for that.
Yeah. Okay.
So those opposed.
Those opposed to that. So
Well, I'd prefer to put my own amendment first.
Well, I'll tell you what. I've given one proposal. I'm happy to. So we have 4 supporters for that. Do we have anybody opposed to that? If you're opposed to that, Brian, or say so?
Well, I'm not opposed, but I want to make it stronger by.
I mean, I think the 2 proposals are distinct.
Yeah. Well,
so we can put a separate proposal to the committee afterwards. But are you brought? So I've given you a sense of where. Go ahead.
Perhaps if you put Brian's proposal first, and if it doesn't pass, then put yours.
Okay.
Would be normal.
And can I clarify my wording then?
Okay. Yeah. So if I'm articulating it correctly, Brian is proposing that we write to. Is it the Treasury or the Treasury itself rather than the House of Lords Committee, articulating the strong opposition of this committee to this specific proposal and the threshold change around parcels. Can I have people? So that is distinct from the one I proposed before. But
and I'll second that, Chair.
So that's been seconded by Steve Aiken. Can I have?
And supporting the work of government to ensure we can minimise any potential impact on consumers and businesses in Northern Ireland.
Okay. Can I have people? Can we have
Chair? Can we have ayes for that?
Can we have ayes for that?
Aye.
1, 2.
Aye.
That's 3. That's okay. Mr. Kingston, Deputy Chair, and Dr. Aiken.
Okay. Can we have
those opposed to that?
So we have.
So the Chair, Mr. Tennyson, Ms. Dolan, and Mr. Carroll. That's 4.
Okay.
Over the 3. So that proposal is not carried.
Now, So in response to that, I'm going to summarise that we write back my previous proposal, which is kind of what we would have done anyway, but just for the record, we will write back to the House of Lords Committee, indicate that we would like to be kept abreast of this, indicate that there are a range of views in the committee, but there's interest and concern and a range of views, but we would like to be kept abreast. Members content with that? Deputy Chair.
Yeah, just for clarity, as Brian's proposal went first and it wasn't passed, if you wanted to put yours again in the absence of Brian's going, I would be in support of yours going, just consequential.
We can put that and we'll make sure the minutes reflect that. But we will go back to it's completely fair enough, and I'm happy in these situations for people to put specific proposals. That's why committees exist. But we will be writing back if members are content for the record. We won't be stating a committee opposition at all, but we will be saying there's a range of views in the committee and there's a level of interest and we would like to be kept abreast. Members are content?
Can we just, Chair, because process will be the amendment first and then the original, we need to do the original proposal again. So can we have ayes for the Chair's proposal?
So ayes for my proposal.
So yourself, Mr Tennyson, Ms Dolan, Dr Aiken, Mr Carroll and the Deputy Chair.
Okay.
So that's carried, Chair.
That's carried, okay.
Thank you.
Fine. Now, we're going to move on to another... it's not related, but it does relate to a Westminster committee, the NI Affairs Committee. We've been copied into correspondence from the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee to the Chancellor regarding energy bill support. The Northern Ireland Affairs Committee is seeking clarity on the position of the £81 million autumn budget announcements and £17 million obligation for renewable energy support. We will be copied into a reply in due course, which will, I think, be interesting. Okay. So 520 is the Department of Finance Roundtable report. Members, that's at page 86. That's a copy of the Finance Minister's Banking Roundtable Summary report, which was published on the 1st of April 2026. The Minister's also sharing a copy with Treasury and FCA and writing to UK Finance, highlighting challenges faced by the community and voluntary sector when banking. Now, members, we are due to receive an update briefing from the Department on the Committee's banking inquiry on the 29th of April, so I would just encourage people to refamiliarise themselves with all the recommendations we made so that we can ask questions in a fortnight. Members content? Grand. Okay. Now we're going to go into the table pack. AFP bill. We have got a lot of matters arising to get through, so but we're nearly done. 5.24 is the Administrative and Financial Provisions Bill, Notice of Amendments. That's at page 29 of the table pack. There are a number of amendments there that have been tabled for noting, and we'll be discussing them next week. Well, we may or may not be discussing them. Well, I assume the Minister's one will be discussed because they're
Chair, down to the Speaker. The Speaker.
Okay. We'll see. So, do we have our witnesses here already?
We do, Chair.
We do.
Already.
So, what I might do then, members, if we're content, is just jump on to our rules, to oral evidence. We'll go on to, rather than keep them waiting. So, members, agenda item 12 is the multi-year budget. We are agreed, I presume, that Hansard will record this item.
Thank you.
Good. Okay. So, at page 178 of the meeting pack, there's a clerk's memo on this oral briefing from DOF officials on a range of budgetary matters, including the position relation to the multi-year budget, open book exercise, and the reserve claim. Papers also provided include the DALO response from the 11th of March, terms of reference for the open book exercise at page 180, submission from a member of the public regarding domestic rates, max capital value, they're page 184 and 192, and a series of briefing papers from RAIS on the draft budget, starting at page 193 of the meeting pack. So we have with us, for one of the final times, if not the final time, Joanne McBurney, Deputy Secretary at the Department of Finance, Patrick Neeson, who's Assistant Secretary, and Marianne Smith, who's Director at the Department. So, Joanne, if you'd make an opening statement.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to brief the committee today. We touched on some of these issues briefly when I was here before Easter, so I'll keep my opening remarks brief. As the committee are aware, the £400 million reserve claim, which was provided in 25-26, was included in the Department's final budget allocations for that year. The Treasury report following the open book exercise has now been shared with the Executive. It represents high-level Treasury analysis and will be used to inform discussions with the Treasury and the Executive's own consideration of the budget. Intensive work is ongoing in relation to the budget. The Finance Ministers continue to engage with the UK Government to make the case for fairer funding for public services and is working in partnership with ministerial colleagues to progress the multi-year budget. An updated Executive paper has been provided for consideration, which reflects repayment of the reserve claim following Treasury confirmation in February and the additional funding from the spring forecast announced on the 3rd of March. Even with the additional funding from the spring forecast, there remain significant pressures across all departments. I'm afraid I can't provide more detail on the budget given the ongoing executive consideration, but we're happy to take any questions the committee may have on any of these topics.
Remember, Sarah, remote to put yourselves on mute. So this doesn't. Okay, Steve, please put yourself on mute. Steve. Steve, could you put yourself on mute, please? No.
We can't know.
Slightly.
He has to do that himself.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, sorry, that was it. Happy to take any questions. I said I was keeping them brief, and I did.
Okay, I don't know how square brackets cackle can be included in Hansard, but anyway. Okay, thank you. So tomorrow there's going to be an executive meeting with the multi-year budget. Is the hope that the multi-year budget is agreed tomorrow?
I haven't seen the agenda for the executive meeting, but I'd imagine there will be a discussion around the budget. But I don't know whether it'll be imminent, there'll be agreement or not. I couldn't comment on that, but I imagine there'll be discussion on it.
I mean, so yesterday I asked the Justice Minister about her departmental budget. She said she had not agreed her departmental budget. So is the expectation that ministers agree in writing, or there's a soft agreement in person before an executive meeting, or are you expecting, or is the expectation...
Sorry to
go ahead. How would this work? Would we expect a budget to be, would we expect ministers to formally agree in writing before it's signed off at an overall executive meeting normally?
There's just ongoing discussions on the budget. So the normal process would be a paper's brought to the executive, and then the executive either agrees or doesn't agree that paper. But a paper has been shared, and it'll be considered by the executive. But I don't know what's on the agenda for tomorrow. I would imagine it's likely there'll be a discussion around the budget.
Lots of discussions. There's ongoing discussions and lots of discussions. Have all minister so we talked about discussions. Has the minister been meeting his executive colleagues this week bilaterally to finalise the budget?
There haven't been bilateral meetings this week. There have been bilateral meetings previously, and there is ongoing engagement. Now, I can only talk for meetings that I'm involved in. There's ongoing discussions and engagements, and there have been ongoing since the draft budget was published.
Right, okay. But I think what people want to know is this going to happen soon? Because the draft budget was published in January, and if there have been discussions since January, that could have been, 3 months ago. Have there been discussions in the past week about finally signing this thing off?
There are ongoing discussions on the budget. That's as much as I can say. These are matters that are under consideration. There are significant issues around the budget. There are significant pressures across all departments, as well as engaging with ministerial colleagues. Finance ministers also engaging with the Treasury and with the NIO. So these are ongoing discussions that are going on at the moment with a view to finalising a budget.
You said he's engaging with the Treasury and the NIO. One of these things might be the participation, according to media reports, of Hilary Benn at the executive tomorrow. Was it the Finance Department who invited Mr. Benn?
I honestly can't comment on that. The Finance Minister did meet with the Secretary of State earlier this week and is hoping to meet with him again tomorrow. But as the executive meeting, that's the Executive Office's business, not mine.
Have you ever, are you aware in the past of a Secretary of State ever participating in an executive budget discussion like that before?
As I say, I can't comment on the Executive's business. I can only comment on our engagement. And yes, we obviously engage with the Treasury and with the NIO on all matters relating to finances here.
Okay, admirably general answers, Joanne, for your one of your final appearances in front of us. Just on the draft budget, just so we're clear, the department is now in breach of the law.
Yes, the legislation does say that a budget should be brought, but with executive agreement. But I think you have to recognise the very challenging circumstances we're in, given the need for a 400 million reserve claim, the need to repay that reserve claim, and the pressures that are being forecast by all departments, particularly health and education. It's a very challenging position.
I suppose it's never not a challenging position, and it hasn't ever been a challenging position, certainly so long as I've sat on this committee. But in relation to the pressures that are faced, can you give us an indication? So we're now into the new financial year, and what is from your perspective, what is the unmet pressure that exists as of the start of the financial year when you factor in the reserve claim and repayments?
I couldn't put a figure on the unmet pressure because every department will give you a figure for its own particular pressure, and obviously that's subject to the discussions on agreeing a budget, what level of funding each department needs. There's what a department would want and desire, and then there's what they absolutely need, so I couldn't put a figure on it. But there are immense pressures, particularly in health and education, as borne out by the need for the reserve claim this year for those two departments.
So, and this was before some of the, this was post the reserve claim, but before some of the money from the final monies from the last financial year were I think, allocated from London. We had I suppose a guesstimate or from Anne Watt from Pivotal that a rough calculation might be £1 billion of overspend in 26-27. Would you recognise that number, or does it seem too high?
Again, I can't comment, and I think I said this the last time, I haven't seen Pivotal's analysis, so I can't really comment on that. Certainly, if you were to take the total pressures, if you were to take every department's bids and take off the allocations we give them, you would get a figure that is far north of £1 billion. But then again, what is the absolute necessary amount the departments need? That's a different matter.
And that's the purpose of budget discussions. Yes. But if we're in a situation where those budget discussions are kind of ongoing, as you've said, and there's no clear end point, and there's no clear political desire or pressure to get to an end point, then it just goes on, and departments just keep continuing with these positions. What, from your perspective, what is the latest possible? I mean, theoretically, I suppose you could allocate a budget on the 31st of March next year at 5 minutes to midnight for the sake of form, but obviously that would be preposterous. But we're now in a situation where we're a fortnight into the financial year. At what point does it become? At what point do we start really getting into chaotic? We've heard, for example, about the Communities Minister writing to charities in terms of giving them essentially 3-month letters. We're going to see more of that, I presume, in other parts of the public sector. At what point does it become a bit of a crisis in relation to setting a budget?
I don't think you could put an absolute date on it. Obviously, the sooner we have a budget agreed, the better. When departments are working without a budget, then they don't have that ability to plan effectively. And as you say, that does have an impact, and considerations have to be given, basically, I suppose, to every decision. But you couldn't put a date on it. It's just the sooner a budget is agreed, the better for everybody, so as departments can plan effectively.
Obviously, the voting account will run at a certain point, and we will probably then have another vote to kind of reauthorise spending. Just explain to us what happens if an executive budget isn't agreed, but we have another budget bill and another. So it is possible to continue spending without an overall executive budget, even after if there's a new budget bill?
Yes, technically I don't think we're in the territory of going down that track yet. The voting account will keep departments going until the summer, and I would hope that a budget will be agreed long before then. Yes, if that doesn't happen, there are contingency measures, but it's not something we're countenancing at this point in time. But you're right, you could bring another budget bill, or there is provision in the Northern Ireland Act and the Government Resources and Accounts Act for other measures, but we're not at that point.
No. Okay. In relation to the open book exercise, one of the book is now closed, seemingly. Can you give us an update on what the outworking of the open book exercise will be?
Well, as I said in my opening remarks, it has been shared with executive colleagues, so it is forming.
And was it shared recently, or?
Well, it was shared shortly after it was received by ourselves. I think it was just before I was here the last time it had just come in, so it had been shared then. And it forms part of, I suppose, the discussions that are ongoing with the UK government on the back of that, and for the executive to factor it into its own considerations of the budget. So it's all part of that ongoing process at the moment. And
have any executive ministers fed back on the open book exercise?
Well, I think without going into the detail of it, I think we need to recognise that it was done with, I think, and I said this before, a very short time frame, which means the analysis that Treasury have done are very high level, and I think Treasury themselves would accept that. So there are areas where we wouldn't necessarily fully agree with their numbers, but it is the sort of broad areas that are there will form part of the executive's considerations. But there hasn't been any particular feedback on it, other than there are areas where we wouldn't concur with their analysis, but reflecting that it is high level and was done in a short period.
What kind of analysis wouldn't you concur with? What are they saying that you wouldn't agree with?
Well, just some of the, they have taken how some of our spend compares to England. But I think, as I said before, it's not that simple, and there's things. So it's basically, they've come up with broad areas to look at, and there are some areas where you could go in and start to do more in-depth analysis, but actually at this point it's the broad themes that are more important, and actually just the ongoing discussions between the UK government and the executive and the executive's own discussions.
What was the point then of the entire exercise? If it was high level, but they knew the information anyway, and you're in constant contact with them, surely they knew all this information in the first place. Why not just...
I don't think they'd looked at it in that way, so it does help to inform their understanding of the pressures, and it gives another lens through which to look at everything.
There's no additional... So one of the arguments the Finance Minister made was this will allow us to argue to the Treasury that we need more funding. Now, one might say that he was going to say that anyway, and that's his job, but... has that argument arisen? Has he made that argument to them on the basis of the open book exercise, and have they accepted it?
Well, that has been an ongoing discussion with the Treasury, and yes, the open book exercise is part of that. But yes, the Finance Minister is an ongoing discussion, making the case for fairer funding for services here.
Okay, but again, a little bit like this strategic cycle on rates, it feels like a kind of fairly circular process without a clear, distinct end point. The book has been closed in the open book exercise, but there's no clear sense that it will lead to a particular outcome one way or the other. It's another part of reviewing. It's an ongoing...
I don't think the intention was ever that it would lead to a clear outcome. I think it is just part of that wider process. The setting of a budget in any circumstances is not a simple process, and when you add in the pressures that departments have and the other issues, it just becomes part of that, the information that's shared to help inform views and inform those discussions.
I think, and it may have been initiated by the Treasury or the NIO or who knows, but I think for a lot of people it just feels a bit either Yesminster or Kafkaesque that this thing was announced, this open book exercise that would have some like end point or meaning, and then it's like, oh no, there's just an ongoing thing anyway. But before I bring in other members, I just want to ask, will we see this open book exercise?
Well, that's a matter for the Executive and the Treasury, so at this point I couldn't comment on whether the Finance
Department couldn't... we're the Finance Committee, surely you could share it with us?
No, it says quite clearly in the terms of reference that whether or not it's published is a matter for the Treasury and the Executive.
I think we'll have to take that up with the Treasury. We've been talking lots about letters to the Treasury today, and that's a letter certainly I would be keen to write. I'll bring in other members now. Deputy Chair first.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for coming. Congratulations on the new role, Joanne. We'll really
indeed, yes,
here
of course.
In finance. Just a few things. We're now in April. Have you got an idea of the 25-26 sort of final outturn position?
We've got the latest forecast outturn trend from departments. We're working through that at the moment, and the committee will get its usual analysis. The position has improved from the last forecast outturn. We're still showing a slight overspend on the latest analysis, but I remain hopeful, and it has come down considerably. So I'd be hopeful that we will reach a balanced position by the end of the year.
Good. And what about the capital budget? How's that ended up?
Again, the capital is, I think, slightly under. I don't have the actual figures because we're still working through the analysis on that. But again, I think we certainly won't be over, and we'll hopefully be slightly under and enough to carry forward.
That's good. Thank you very much. As the Chair had said, we had saw note of the Secretary of State going to the executive meeting and the ongoing discussions around the financing. And I was wondering, is the conversation still open around our level of need here in Northern Ireland? Because my understanding around the open book exercise was whenever Treasury have came in to get that full understanding, it should have maybe exposed that, and where specifically we're still struggling within certain departments.
It is still something that is on the table and still being discussed with the Treasury. One of the other things that has come out, I suppose, through the ongoing discussions at the moment and our analysis of it is not even so much just the level of need. Obviously, we would argue it shouldn't be 124, it should be much higher. But actually, that while the executive is funded at that 124 level of need, Scotland and Wales are funded significantly above that, and I think that is having an impact on our ability. Scotland and Wales being funded significantly above their estimated level of need means that they have more capacity to address emerging pressures. The executive is currently hovering around its 124% level of need, and that gives less capacity. So those are all part of the ongoing discussions we're having with the Treasury.
Well, that's good to know, because as we're sitting at that sort of funding floor level, it just totally takes away your ability to invest to save. And do you think that having that set out in that way compared to Scotland, you know, is a useful exercise, and it is showing potential for progress?
Well, I think from our side, it's useful for us to show that. I mean, obviously part of the ongoing discussions, and we don't know where those are going to end with the Treasury, but I think it's useful for us to highlight that while we are funded at need, that does not provide the level of support that others would have.
And then, so obviously we've closed 25-26. We've had the reserve claim to kind of get us through business, but as we've opened 26-27, you know, the same challenges exist right across our different departments. You know, the Education Minister was saying, you know, this week in the Chamber, how, you know, you're opening the year looking at this budget pressure to exist as you are. But you talked about the vote on account will carry us through these few months. Is there any guidance to departments in terms of, until the multi-year budget or any budget would be agreed, how they should be spending in these opening couple of months in the year?
There's nothing that's been issued yet, but that's something that's being considered.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And then, so you said that, yes, we'll get the outturn figures back to us quite soon. And then in terms of the Department of Finance itself, is there any particular issues that have come up in and around year end?
Well, not my particular area, so it would fall to the FD, Gavin Patrick. I'm not aware of any issues around the year end, but Gavin would speak better to that than I would.
And then we had sort of touched on it before, but again, maybe it's not just quite your area. The transformations, we had the executive restoration package, you had our transformation projects, and all of these things sitting there. We were talking earlier about how much has actually been drawn down in the 25-26 year. Have you sight of that, or have you any indication of how much? I don't
have it with me, but we will have that.
Yeah.
So we can provide, but I don't have it with me at the moment to say, because we're still working through the end of year figures.
Thank you. No, thanks very much, Joanne.
Okay. Steve Aiken.
Hi, Joanne, and congratulations on your promotion. Great to see it. And
not a promotion, unfortunately. It's just a move.
Well, I think whatever you've done is sterling work, and I've been really enjoyed working with you all these years through thick and thin and the rest of it.
Thank you.
So just a couple of questions. First one, we've talked about because we're now outside the Budget Act, so now legally we're very much into sort of the usual territory we seem to get into. But can you give us an idea of how much the vote of account has already been spent up, if you know what I mean, before we head towards the next quarter, and what the implications are likely to be? That's my first question. And the second one is, obviously the open book exercise, and I've fired in quite a few questions to the Minister and the Department of Executive as well. And I actually got some better responses from the Department of Treasury, or the Treasury, which was more interesting. And their view is if the executive want to publish it, go ahead and publish it. And the other really interesting point that they came with as well is that they've obviously spent a lot of time reading the Fiscal Council's report, and also the reports from the Northern Ireland Audit Office, and how much it's costing per. And I think one of the things that it was indicated to me was how much it was costing per civil servant for delivery, as compared to against an English sort of local council. And I know there's not a direct equivalence, but you know, the difference between 1 and 1.88 is very significant. Has any of the Treasury's thought processes found their way back into the thinking within the Department of Finance? Because they're much, put it this way, they're much more loquacious about letting us know what was going on than the Northern Ireland Executive is. And I'm pretty sure that if I ask them the question, they'll give me the report.
Okay, well, taking your first question first, don't know how much of the voting account has been drawn down. We would have those figures, I just don't have them in front of me, but we're in early stages of the year, so I wouldn't imagine.
Yeah, could you ping them to us, please? That would be quite useful.
Well, now they change every day, so we can get you them at a point in time.
We're getting an indication now of how close we're getting, because I mean, I haven't gone through this. Well, you and I have gone through this 3 times before. So if we could just get an idea of an indication to see what sort of cliff edge is coming, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I do think we're nowhere near that yet. It will be June, July before we get anywhere near the limit of the voting account, but we can certainly provide you with the drawdown of cash figures. In terms of the open book, it's hard for me to comment on what Treasury have said without actually seeing in front of me what Treasury have said. The terms of reference do very clearly say it's for Treasury and the Executive to agree whether or not they publish it. And it's the Executive, not the Department of Finance. I would be cautious myself about publishing it, quite simply because we wouldn't agree with all of the Treasury analysis in it. We wouldn't have time to check all of that, which is why it's a Treasury report. We would need to go through it, and I think that comes back to some of the numbers you maybe quoted about the civil service cost of delivery. I think you rightly said you're not necessarily comparing like for like, so I think before those figures are used, you would have to be very careful at what was being compared and are they a relevant comparison. So I think that would, excuse me, some of the thinking in the report are things that we ourselves would be looking at, and some of those comparisons to spend, in between ourselves and comparators. But you have to be very aware of the differences between the different jurisdictions. There are things that are done centrally here, which are done in local authorities in England. There's different things that sit in the public sector here, which are privatised in England. There are all of those differences. We also have less capacity, for example, for economies of scale. So we're very different. We're a lot smaller. Some of the differences are reflected in that 1 to 4% level of need. Some things aren't. There's also the fact that we have things that we need to fund which aren't funded in England, and therefore we don't provide Barnett for it. So, for example, the legacy costs or the victims' payments, or in 26-27, the PSNI data breach. So there are a lot of differences. So comparisons between jurisdictions may be helpful in some cases, are not helpful in all.
Yeah, and just a final one. I mean, sort of the discussions that I've had and the trails come back and forth. I mean, they did seem really very well informed. I mean, they were using the fiscal councils. They'd read the fiscal commission stuff. They'd read the Northern Ireland Audit stuff. They were all over, and they even read. I think they've even read the pivotal document as well. So, I mean, it was, would you agree with us that, it wasn't just a case of them not coming in informed, they seemed to be fairly informed in what they were doing?
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, I've no doubt Treasury keep up to date. I'm not being critical of Treasury colleagues. Treasury keep up to date with anything that's published in relation to any of the devolved governments. Treasury will be up to speed with it and will keep it. And when they're doing this open book report, they will have been looking at the fiscal council information, etc. I suppose what I'm saying is that they were asked to do a significant body of work within a very short time period, and therefore by its very nature it has limited the analysis they could do, particularly when you take into account how different things are, the different ways services are funded, etc. So it's because of that time limit, as opposed to any criticism of Treasury. We have very good relationships with Treasury and they are very well informed, but the time period within which was available, and it's one of those bodies of work that you could have had a whole team looking at something for about a year to come up with something very, very robust. But we don't have a year because we need to get a budget agreed. So I think it's just reflective of that. And similarly for ourselves, we would need to go through all of the Treasury analysis to make sure we were content with it. And that's why I'm saying I would be cautious about publishing the report until DOF had time to do that. And at the minute, we're a very small team, and obviously our focus is on getting a budget agreed.
So that'll go to your relief then. He'll struggle through it, or her. Cheers.
Yeah.
But it's been a pleasure working with you. Best wishes.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
So, Gemma Dolan.
Thank you, Chair. And Joanne, same as everyone else has said, I'm very sorry to see you going, but congratulations.
Thank you.
Just a couple of questions. So, see if a multi-year budget isn't agreed, will that limit, well, obviously it will limit the ability for transformation of public services, will it?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I suppose the absence of a multi-year budget will have a significant ability on departments' ability to plan for the longer term. And that in itself will limit the ability for transformation of services. Departments might be reluctant to start initiatives if there's no guarantee of funding in future years. And obviously the other thing is that delay in agreeing a budget is delay in starting some of those things which need funding. So it absolutely will have an impact.
Okay. Yeah, it's what I thought. And then just one other question for me. The repayment of the reserve claim, what challenges does that bring to the executive or for the executive?
It exacerbates the financial pressures facing the executive, obviously, over the budget period. The repayment needs to be reflected in the budget position. For 26-27, the additional funding received in the spring forecast is greater than the reserve claim repayment, which is it's 80 million in 26-27. So we won't need to really reduce the draft budget allocations to departments. But in the subsequent 2 years, the spring forecast funding was lower than the repayments. And that's going to be particularly significant in 27-28 when we have a repayment of 160 million, but the spring forecast just gave us 5.6 million. So obviously that means we need to reopen those draft budget allocations if we're going to, factor in the repayment of that reserve claim. So it will have an impact. There's no doubt it has an impact. I suppose it's positive that it's spread over 3 years, because there's absolutely no way we could have managed to have it all just fallen as an overspend and come off in the first year, but it is still very, very challenging.
Yeah, it sounds that. Okay, thank you, Joanne, and good luck in your new role.
Thank you.
Okay, Jerry, Carl.
Yeah, thanks. I just think just some of the questions, Chair, you're asking earlier on were valid, and I think it's quite frustrating to generally not receive any information. And it seems to be that all these conversations are ongoing, everything is ongoing, and I feel quite frustrated about the lack of information coming through. And maybe in some cases you'd probably get more information from North Korea than the Northern Ireland Executive, and it's a general comment rather than anything specifically that Joanne has said. And I would imagine that some journalists have probably been briefed unofficially or officially on some of the stuff. So I just, as a general comment, I find some of that incredibly frustrating that we're not kept abreast, and by extension the public. So it's just a comment. In terms of question, just about the reserve claim as well, Joanne. So the payback, if I understood it, is 80 million and 160 million and 160 million in the 3 years. So obviously you'll be well aware that given different debates in Stormont, like we had a debate about holiday hunger payment on I think Monday, and the Education Minister was saying that the 20 million or so that would cost the holiday hunger payment can't be absorbed because his department is under pressure. I think it's a good policy and it should be absorbed and implemented. But you're talking about 80 million and 160 million and 160 million. So how will that payback to Treasury be absorbed, and which departments are really exposed with this quite substantial payback for 3 years?
Well, I suppose you're right with the 80, 160, 160, and it will have to be reflected in the budget position, so it does reduce the funding that is available for departments and for other services. I don't see any one department, but it reduces the overall pot of funding, which means that effectively it's going to impact on all departments, because the less money we have to allocate, the less money that all departments get. So it really affects across the board. There's no specific, it'll be this taken off, because there's money to hand out against a baseline position, but it's limiting that money that's available to hand out, so it affects everybody really.
And Joanne, maybe this was discussed at a previous committee, I just can't recall. Has there been any discussions about extending that, paying that back over a longer period of time? I just can't recall that. I think there might have been some suggestion that could have been the case.
Well, I think we would want to make the case to Treasury that, the reserve claim we needed this year is actually a symptom of the pressures we're facing and the difficulties we have, which is part of the issue around us wanting fairer funding for services here. So there would be an argument that we shouldn't have to repay that reserve claim, but that's part of the ongoing discussions. Treasury at the moment gave the reserve claim on the basis that it would be repaid over the 3 years in that profile. Only Treasury can change that profile of repayment. The Executive, I would imagine, will want to push for either an extension or it to be written off, but it's all part of those ongoing negotiations, which all comes down to the level of pressures we're facing and what can be done to manage those.
I appreciate that. Just final questions, but there's nothing in theory if the Treasury decided to say this payment could be waived or could be paid back over a 30-year period. Like, they've got the power to do that. It's just a question of political will. Would that be correct?
Treasury absolutely have the power. They manage the public expenditure across all of the UK, so they have the power to make those decisions. Now, Treasury would say they have other factors to take into account. Their own finances, for example, are under obviously extreme pressure at the minute. So to be fair to them, they will say they have other things to take into account and the repercussive effect of that, but absolutely it's within their control.
Also got a record surplus, but thanks and good luck with the new job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Owen Tennyson.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll just echo my congratulations, Joanne, on the new post. Most of the ground has already been covered. But I'll maybe just follow up on a few things that have already been raised by other members. So obviously Gemma and Jerry focused on the reserve claim, and Gemma mentioned the Barnett consequentials from the spring statement, and obviously in the aftermath of that there were lots of demands for that money to be invested in certain areas. So just to get some clarity on that, effectively what you're saying is that money will be absorbed by the reserve claim and will not be available for any other priorities. Is that the case?
I wouldn't say the money so much as reserved for the reserve claim. It all goes into the overall funding available, and that all has to be taken into account when we're agreeing a budget So it does effectively reduce the money that's available. So it will mean changes to, to budgets. There will be, as I said, a bit more to hand out in 26-27 than was in the draft budget. There's also potential for those draft budget allocations to change, but it's all in the round. It reduces the funding that's available.
Okay, and then just in relation to what the Deputy Chair had raised around the comparison with Scotland and Wales in relative need, can you elaborate any more just in cash terms or in any analysis the Department has done on what the gap between ourselves and Scotland and Wales is? And is there anything that could be provided to this committee to inform us more about what the differentials are to help our thinking?
Well, I'm going to say we, but it's DOF. It's not my area of DOF. Have done, so I want to take the credit for something we didn't do, have done some analysis on it. So obviously it's based on our analysis and it's not based on Treasury analysis, which is that. But our figures would show that for 26-27, we're not 0.6% above our 124% level of need. Wales are 8.6% higher and Scotland are 20.5% higher. Now, Wales obviously have had the whole framework, so they have the figure. Scotland only have an estimated sort of level of need, but those are our calculations that we would say that, that they are in a better
so it is quite considerable, a
yes.
gap between Northern Ireland and other devolved regions. That's helpful. And then the final question that I have is just, obviously the Finance Minister has said that his discussions with the NIO and Treasury are focused on fair funding for public services in very broad terms, but can the Department be any more specific around what areas are in scope or what the Finance Minister's objective in those discussions is?
Well, we obviously can't go into too much detail, but he will be raising matters like that. The fair funding, we're not being treated in the same way as Scotland and Wales. Not, I suppose, through any specific decision to treat us differently, but it's the way the numbers have actually panned out. He'll also be raising the pressures that we're facing. And he also does raise on a regular basis that actually one of the problems we face is that underfunding of service in England leads to underfunding of services in the devolved government. So obviously, if public services were funded better across the board, then that would generate more money for us, but also how we're treated, as I say, in comparison to Scotland and Wales, and the unique pressures that we face and the specific pressures that required the reserve claim last year and are leading to the difficulties with the budget over the next 3 years.
Thank you. That's me, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, next is Brian Kingston.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for your attendance and congratulations, Joanne, on your new post. First, on the open book exercise, we were told originally this would be a joint exercise, a joint report from Treasury and Department of Finance. How has that ended up?
Yes, it was to be a joint report, and we did work with the Treasury. We provided them with information that was requested. We facilitated returns from departments. We worked with them through it. But again, it was down to that time frame. So Treasury had done their own analysis based on the information that ourselves and departments had provided. We didn't have the time to go in and check all of that analysis. Therefore, we couldn't put our name to a report where we couldn't actually stand over. So that's not to say that there are areas where we may disagree, but unless we've checked it, you wouldn't put your name to it. So it was for that reason that it's not a joint report.
It's an HM Treasury report?
It is. It's HM Treasury analysis, but we did assist with it, and departments provided information. So it was a joint effort to provide the information and to do everything, but ultimately it's Treasury's analysis that is in it.
So people might wonder the significance of that, or is it a dispute over the findings, or are you just saying, from your point of view, are you saying the department just didn't have time to verify?
There's probably not a dispute over the findings. There are some areas where we had went back with comments to say we're not sure about this or we're not sure about that or that. But there's also the broader bit that we simply wouldn't have had time to go through absolutely everything. We'd have had to have replicated what they had done, and there wasn't time to do that. There are areas where we have flagged, actually, yes, we don't think that's right, or that's not our understanding of it. So there are areas where, and with longer time, if you're doing a joint report, you take the time to hammer all of that out and get to an agreed position. The time wasn't available to do that.
Do you expect the report will end up in the public domain?
I honestly do not know. It's in the hands of the executive and as I say, the Treasury. But as I did say, I'm not sure actually how helpful that would be unless we had an agreed position on everything.
And helpful to who, I suppose, is the question. Go ahead, Brian.
Do you think that this open book exercise, there will be a legacy from it in terms of, I don't know what why it was necessary. I mean, how much access Treasury normally has to all those figures, or is there a certain withholding of figures? And do you think it will result in greater communication or openness, whatever word you want to put on it?
There's no withholding of numbers or of figures in any way, and Treasury actually have the legislative power to ask for whatever they want to from ourselves, and we wouldn't withhold information from Treasury, but they don't have capacity either, so it's not something that Treasury would ever, I suppose, have the time to come in and look at. So it was a one-off from that perspective, and unique because this is the first time, I suppose, Treasury have ever actually come in and specifically asked for information for us and then done this sort of analysis. I think it will lead to a better understanding. I don't think it will change because we do have a good working relationship with the Treasury. It's not them and us or us withholding information. If Treasury wants something to get it, and sometimes we'll provide things, and we do the forecast outturn that comes to this committee goes routinely to the Treasury. They get other routine information from ourselves. So it's not that was unique. It was, I suppose, the time taken for the Treasury to do the analysis. And I suppose just coming on the Chair's comment of helpful to who, I don't think it's helpful to anybody if there are numbers out there which would then later be disputed or argued against. I think it just adds to confusion. I think if you want to put something out publicly, it should be a position that is agreed.
So,
Ahead.
no, go for it. Have you finished your questions, right?
Well, I was going to move on slightly, just on that question about ongoing access. So you would say there is full access for Treasury of the Northern Ireland Department of Finances?
If Treasury were to ask us for something, it would be provided. Treasury get routine information. They don't generally come and ask for anything additional. If they were to ask for it, then, as I say, they have that power to compel us to do that. But we have a good relationship, and we wouldn't tend to withhold things if they come and ask for it. But again, Treasury's a bit like ourselves. It's a very small team, and they also manage Scotland and Wales, so their capacity to do anything in depth is limited.
We'll move on to another point. If you
go ahead.
Okay.
It's fine.
But I was interested in what you said about the level of need that funding in Wales actually get funded above their decided level of need. So can you explain what their level of need is, and in what way do they get more, or is it through different channels, or is it just their block grant is higher?
Well, we're straying into areas that are not, and Patrick might help me out on this one because it's not our area. It's another part of DOF that would do that analysis. But Wales had the Holcomb Commission at a much earlier stage than we had our work. It was done by the Fiscal Council on the level of need, and at that point they identified that they were coming down, and they put basically what was in a fiscal floor, and they got Barnett at 1.05%, which allowed them to come down more slowly towards that fiscal floor. We were already below need and had to be bumped up, so Wales were coming down slowly, which has resulted in them sort of staying above it. We were down and then had to be brought up to it, and now we're bumping along that level of need. So I suppose that's the difference with Wales. Scotland have been historically, I would say that all of the regions were above any assessed level of need and coming down slowly. We just happen to have come down quite quickly.
Northern Ireland came down quickly.
Yeah.
Okay. The last question, in terms of Northern Ireland's contribution to the UK economy, so obviously we have a certain amount of money goes down within Northern Ireland, but is there any analysis that we're a net contributor to the UK economy due to stuff being ordered, which is supplied from GB, so that when money's provided to us, there's a slow drain of money back to GB because things are being bought either by individual residents or by companies, so that there's a net flow of money back to GB?
I'm not sure if that analysis has been done. It hasn't been done in my area. I'm not sure if it's maybe something that the Department for Economy or something has done, but it's not something that we have done.
Right. It's just in terms of the argument about Northern Ireland's overall contribution to the economy.
Well, I think there's no doubt, given that all money raised through taxes goes back into the exchequer, I think there's no doubt that if the Northern Ireland economy is doing better, it benefits the UK exchequer. I think that there's no doubt in that.
Yeah. It's just, as I say, I would make the argument that not only does our money go back to the exchequer, and obviously and we get an amount back, but also just even through private sector transactions, there's money flowing back from Northern Ireland constantly to GB. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay, just a couple of final points, Joanne. Just on to go back to the reserve claim, a lot of people will note that the amount of the reserve claim, which is £400 million, is strikingly similar to the £380 million spring statement allocation. That is a complete, just for the record, that's a complete coincidence.
Complete coincidence, yes.
But it is a coincidence which people will note, and you yourself have acknowledged that the cash amount is extremely similar to the cash amount that came from the reserve claim. Now, you've talked about the fact that the way it's profiled is sort of a big amount year one, a very small amount in year two, and then another relatively big amount in year three, which is unusual. However, overall, the difference between that cash amount, the 20 million basic difference, I mean, spread over 3 years, that's, if we put that number to, that's the kind of number you would say to us in regular terms. I'm confident that that could be managed in the course of a single financial year, let alone 3. I think that's fair to say, isn't it? It's not there's not a huge difference.
The gap between the two?
Yes.
Yeah, I think in overall terms, yes. I think the problem is, 1, the yearly profile, and 2, the purposes for which the Barnett was provided, where we don't hypothecate Barnett, so it doesn't go for that purposes. It did come primarily from SEN, particularly in 26-27, where it was SEN deficits in councils that were being written off, which I think points to the pressures that we're facing in the education system are pressures that are being felt across the board. So our pressures are not unique, but it also means that if the money is coming for those pressures we're facing and it is then used to repay the reserve claim, it's not available to help fund those pressures. So while in overall monetary terms, yes, the difference isn't big, I think we need the extra Barnett to fund the pressures we are facing. That's why we're getting the money.
It's interesting you draw the comparison between, there are clearly huge SEN pressures here, just as there are SEN pressures in England, but regularly when I ask the question, not necessarily specifically of you, but of the department and indeed the minister, about why isn't an amount of money a Barnett that is generated by the health service or spending on roads in England not being hypothecated for that in Northern Ireland. I'm told Barnett is not hypothecated. So, but now you're telling me, but maybe, you know, my question to you is, well, surely this is repaying the reserve claim, and basically you have
it
the
will
amount.
Yes. Sorry, I'm talking over you. It will effectively repay the reserve claim, and Barnett isn't hypothecated. That is one of the key principles of devolution, because if we hypothecated all the Barnett, we may as well not be devolved, because then the executive wouldn't be making its own decisions. But what I'm saying is that the Barnett that came is indicative of the pressures that are being faced in England. We are facing similar pressures here. While we wouldn't give the money directly across, the fact that we have the reserve claim to repay means it's not available for those and other pressures. Another reason for not hypothecating the Barnett is the executive makes obviously its own policy decisions. There are things we fund here which we do not get Barnett on, and I touched also on some of them earlier, which are things we have to fund. The victims' payments, the legacy costs, we don't get Barnett on those things. So you couldn't hypothecate at all.
Back to the point about the point of devolution and why you have devolution in the first place. I suppose, first of all, it's so you can set a budget. We haven't done that yet. There isn't political agreement. It's so that you have, and you alluded to it there, that you have autonomy over budgetary matters. But I suppose an observer would say, well, in that case, why is the Department of Finance inviting or allowing the Treasury to come in and do this open book exercise, which then has things, these sort of apparent, it's now the, I've forgotten someone will correct me, the fifth secret of Fatima or the fourth secret of Fatima. Now we'll never get to see this report. The Treasury's been invited in to do this report, but we'll never be able to see it. And now we also have the Secretary of State literally invited to sit in on an executive discussion on a budget. It just seems like, on the one hand, we're talking about protecting the integrity of the devolved finance process, but on the other hand, we are regularly undermining it. I mean, I would say, as a political comment, ministers are determined to undermine it by constantly blaming the UK government for decisions, even if we all agree there isn't enough money. So I suppose, would you accept that the devolved financial settlement's kind of been undermined by things like this open book exercise, inviting the Secretary of State and constantly...
No, the open book, if you read the terms of reference, was very clear that Treasury was not stepping into making decisions or making recommendations. They were simply doing analysis. And I think making the case that Northern Ireland needs fairer funding and it is facing pressures doesn't undermine the ability of the executive to make its own policy decisions. It is simply making the case that we need fairer funding. Scotland and Wales are in a better position than we're in. This needs to be taken into account. I don't think that undermines devolution, and the Treasury is not coming in to make decisions for us. They're coming in to do a bit of analysis. Okay, but we still may never see this report. I suppose that there is a concern. I think we'll want to come on and talk about that ourselves. Finally, just in relation to a couple of final points. You mentioned the underspend, or it may not be an underspend on the capital position. Just for the record, and we'll get the full year-end details, as you said, eventually.
There was obviously a huge underspend in relation to the A5 for reasons that are well known. That's not the Department of Finance's responsibility, but the underspend will have to be that meant that there was this big £100 million plus capital underspend very late in the financial year. Can you give us an overview to how you've managed to get all that money out the door so that we're not going to carry a big underspend?
Right, well, the money was, I don't have the details in front of me, but the money was, as you know, allocated coming up to the end of the financial year. Yeah. In terms of the A5, there was two components of it. There was the funding from the Irish government, and then there was our own funding. Our own funding was reallocated to departments who will now spend it. The Irish government funding will be reprofiled to match that profile. So the money has been allocated to departments, and departments are spending it. The underspend I'm referring to is just that normal slippage that happens because you come up towards the end of the financial year.
Normal slippage, so it's not. So but I suppose the question is, it just seems a very lot. I mean, it's a good thing that it's being spent than the alternative. But people will be, I suppose, interested to learn how it's been deployed so quickly.
Well, that was, I don't have the details in front of me, but there was a statement made to the Assembly on how that money was allocated. So it was allocated through the normal in-year processes. Obviously, it was a result of legal challenges, so not really much the Department for Infrastructure could do about that, but the Executive reallocated it, and there are always capital projects, and departments are very good at their capital planning, and they will usually have some things that can be brought forward or pushed back. So, you know, while slippage is inevitable and some things come out of the woodwork at a later stage than you would like, there are mechanisms there to allow it to be reallocated and to allow us to remain within our budget exchange carry forward. Okay, and then just one final question on the Public Sector Transformation Board. Do we know, I know it's not completely in your area, but it does relate to the original restoration package, which you were obviously very involved in. Do we know when there's going to be the second tranche of funding is going to be announced? Is it going to be soon? I have no idea when. I mean, it will be. It's ongoing, but I don't have any confirmation of dates. No further
indication on that. And one final one, that maybe the final question we ever get asked you, Joanne, which maybe in relation to revenue raising. We talked about this a lot at this committee, and obviously you were involved with the Fiscal Commission, not just the Fiscal Council, way back in 5 or 6 years ago now. And one of the desires around the Fiscal Commission was basically to explore options for increasing the amount of fiscal power we have here. Where is that from your perspective?
The fiscal powers part of it,
which is also supposed to be part of the
it's part of the next sort of
framework.
The next stage of the fiscal framework. So those discussions being taken up with Treasury again. Not my side doing those at the minute, but that work will be taken forward.
Have there been any active discussions or any active proposals put to the executive on new fiscal powers you're aware of?
Not my area, so and my memory's not good enough to remember if I've seen anything or not.
Okay. Well, we will be sure to ask your colleagues about the fiscal powers and the extension to a house, which we're going to put on at some stage, but we'll get there eventually. Okay. I have no further questions. No other members have indicated other questions. So at this stage, again, I reiterate my very warm congratulations to you, Joanne, on your new appointment. Very well deserved, and the Department of Health. There again is very much our loss, but we may see you again.
Yep. there's a month to go.
You'll be delighted to hear. Do your penance before you're finally released. Not the Department of Health is obviously an easy task, but thank you, Patrick, Marianne, and Joanne. Thank you.
Thank you.
Members, I am really keen that we get our hands on this open book exercise report. I think we should write to jointly with the Treasury and either, I'm not sure what the best way to do is to write to them jointly or write to them separately. We can write to the Chief Secretary of the Treasury first of all and say we would like to see this report. I think you can't call something an open book exercise and then bury it in a safe or as compressed zip file somewhere on a folder.
Yeah, happy with that request, Chair. I think it would be fair for the committee to have access to that information. Can I also just further to the evidence suggest that we write to ask for the department's analysis of how our relative need compares to Scotland and Wales, because presumably that is fairly significant in terms of what the Finance Minister is discussing with Treasury, and I think it would be helpful for us to be cited on that as well.
I think that's a fair point. I mean, the Finance Minister did say he was confident that this process would lead to I'm not sure he said it would lead to increased funding. He said it would enable the argument to make increased funding. So from the department's perspective, there must have been something which emerged from that they would be able to disclose to us. Deputy Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And just to add to Owen's point, because Joanne had referred to different members of the Department of Finance who had been working on this analysis specifically. So if we ask for it, you could, maybe invite those particular officials
I think we should
in.
definitely,
If they've got a team working specifically on it, it would be a really useful briefing if possible.
Members are content with that? We will do that. Yes. Okay. Now we're going to go on since we have Hansard with us. Oh yes. Apologies.
We just
do this thing.
Before you get to 13, there's an agreement.
Yeah, okay. So members, we are going to go on later on and talk about the, we're actually going to come on and talk about the draft budget, the committee report and the draft budget. Are members content that the raised briefing papers, which are very detailed, are included in that budget committee report? Yeah, okay, committee report on the budget. Okay, now agenda item 13 is the Hansard are going to stay with us. If members are content, it's at page 72 of the tabled pack. It's the committee's report on the 26 to 29/30 draft budget. It was initially considered at the last meeting before Easter recess. Also included page 435 of the meeting pack as a memo from the Executive Office Committee, which includes a Hansard transcript of the committee's oral briefing from Executive Office officials on the draft budget and December monitoring, which took place on the 4th of February. The points raised in this briefing have been incorporated into the revised draft report, which are in members' packs today. Members will note that the Economy and Health Committee inputs will be added once they are received. Hint, hint, if any of their representatives are watching. So it's at page 72 of, so members, that's, if you go to page 72 of the table pack, you'll see the report. Does any member have any amendments to the report? No? Okay. In that case, we will come back, I guess, with a final version to agree at some point. No?
Chair, what we're going to do is, if we go ahead and we agree,
I have an additional.
It'll be under the caveat that we don't necessarily publish until we find out what happens tomorrow.
That's fine. I'm going to, I've skipped over my speaking note, which is very clever. What we'll do first, yes, is this will be subject to what happens tomorrow and indeed future days, but particularly tomorrow. If there's a budget agreement, we may want to we may have to revisit this because
everything else then there'll be an
we will agree everything else.
We'll do an addendum. Tom says we can
okay,
update
fine.
on that basis.
Yeah. Okay, no worries. So format is members. We're going to go through the sections as we normally do in these reports. So first of all, I'm going to refer you to the title page, contents page, powers and membership. I'm going to put the question: are members content the title page, content page, committee powers and membership pages stand part of the report? Content? Okay, now the introduction, it's paragraphs 1 to 7. Are members content? The introduction, paragraphs 1 to 7 stand part of the report? Content? Okay, now the draft budget 26 to 29/30. It's a very significant part of the report. Members content that the draft budget 26 to 29/30 section stand part of the report? That's the paragraphs 8 to 28. Content? Yeah. Now the Committee for Finance Approach section, I'm going to put that's the paragraphs 29 to 80. Are members content that the Committee for Finance Approach section at paragraphs 29 to 80 stand part of the report? Content? Yeah. Statutory and Audit Committee section, this is paragraphs 81 to 24. Are members content that the Statutory and Audit Committee section, paragraphs 80 to 24 stand part of the report, including the addition of any further committee inputs as we get them? Content? Yeah. Committee scrutiny sections at paragraphs 125 to 131. Are members content that the committee scrutiny section paragraphs 125 to 131 stand part of the report? Content? Okay, members, I'm going to refer you to the indices page 96. Are members content indices stand part of the report? Okay, the members, I'm going to say that, put the question that, and this is again subject to the fact that we may update this report and bring any updates back to the committee for agreement if there's a budget agreement tomorrow, or indeed at a future date soon, well, within reason. And obviously, if the budget doesn't get agreed to June, we won't be doing it. But I will put the question that the report on the Minister for Finance's 26 to 29/30 draft budget be the 11th report of the Committee for Finance. Content? Okay, members, if we agreed, we're going to lay this in the Business Office and publish it on the committee website. Yeah, and if we agreed, we're going to copy the bill report to the Minister of Finance in advance of any plenary debate, which obviously would have to be scheduled by the Business Committee. Content? Thank you. Now, members, we have to have a discussion about whether we should bring a motion. My view is, now obviously this is, the relevance of this debate will be contingent on whether whether the executive has agreed a budget. I think previous draft multi-year budgets including the one that previous Minister Murphy brought in 2021-22, were debated. There was a debate and gave members the opportunity to put down points that came up in the committee debate, and indeed some of them will be more detailed than you might make in a budget debate itself. So my own view as to committee chair is we have a precedent, and I think we should do it on that basis, but I'm open to take views from others. Deputy Chair.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that we should take the opportunity just to bring it to the floor as this committee. We've done a lot of work on it. Our clerk team's done a lot of work on it, chasing other committees, trying to push people to get the work, get the briefings, get the returns, even those points in themselves to be continued to be made, to get people to draw attention on what the initial proposals were in the draft budget. Whilst, yes, it's still live, things might change tomorrow, things might change in the weeks ahead. That can all be reflected in any debate, but for us to actually put that marker down, that's what the main business of this committee is. So I would agree with you, Chair. I think we should schedule that.
Members content with that? Though we schedule, obviously we don't know when it'll be. It'll have to go to the business committee, etc. And we don't know what the status of it is. But okay, thank you, members. So we're agreed. Then we will take that forward. Now I'm going to go back to agenda item 6, which is SL1 on the valuations, telecommunications, natural gas amendment, natural gas and water amendment regulations, NI 2026. The purpose of this proposed statutory rule is to update the existing regs by replacing or revising the names of gas transportation companies to the schedule of the valuation. Just to say, members, this has nothing to do with the level of taxation applied or the level of this doesn't set the level of the rate. Obviously, we do that via the rates order, the poundage, and the valuation process. This is about adding or changing the names legally of individual companies. So members, note that the SL1 draft SR and explanatory memorandum have been published in line with new delegated legislation processes. Members, papers begin at page 116, which include a scrutiny paper on the regulations, an SL1 letter from the department, a draft statutory rule at page 122, and an explanatory memorandum at page 125. Members, are you content with the proposed statutory rule to update the existing regulations by replacing or revising the names of gas transportation companies listed in the schedule, sorry, I think I've made up a new word, schedule of the valuation, telecommunications, natural gas and water regs, NI 2010. We agreed? Yeah, okay. If we're agreed, then we'll publish the committee's decision in respect to the rule and notify the department accordingly. Agenda item 7 is the SL1 public service, civil servants and others pensions, remediable service amendment regs, Northern Ireland 2026. Members, there's an SL1. The SL1 in today's pack is subject to a new process that was introduced on 5th of January 26. You won't be asked to make a decision today. There will be subject to a new process, so there will be a different form of consultation beforehand. So members, the papers begin at page 127 and they include a clerk's memo on the public service, civil servants and others pensions remediable service amendment regulations, page 128. SL1 letter from the department at 130, draft statutory rule at page 138, and a draft explanatory memorandum at 148. Members, the purpose of this statutory rule is to make minor technical and clarificatory amendments to legislation relating to the MacLeod remedy, principally, the public service, civil servants and others pensions remediable service regulations, Northern Ireland 2023. So members, we seek agreement, first of all, to note receipt of the SL1 and proposed statutory rule and issue a call for views via survey, publish the SL1, the draft SR and any relevant documents. Are we agreed to that? Right. Okay, grand. Now the committee staff will liaise with the department as necessary to inform the committee's decision on the SL1. The clerk's memo indicates that this will be considered again on the 13th of May, but this is the date for the Balmoral show visit. So if members are agreed, we will consider it, in fact, on the 20th of May. Agreed? Thank you. Yeah, members, can we also get agreement that we do not need on this one a briefing from the department? I don't think we do, without being blasé. Okay, right. We're all agreed then. Agenda item 8 is SL1 baby loss certificates regulations, Northern Ireland 2026. Members, the SL1 in today's pack is subject to a new process that was indicated, introduced on the 5th of January 2026. You will not be asked to make a decision today about the policy merits of this proposed statutory rule. Members, the papers begin at page 154 for this. They include a clerk's memo on the baby loss certificate regulations, Northern Ireland 2026 at page 154, an SL1 from the department at page 155, and a draft statutory rule, page 159, with a draft explanatory memorandum, page 163. Members, the purpose of this proposed statutory rule is to provide the means to enable the provision of a baby loss certificate to those who have lost a baby prior to the end of the 24th week of pregnancy. Members will be, of course, well aware of the background to this issue and extensive committee engagement in the policy and the primary legislation which we scrutinised. Given this, members may wish to shorten the proposed 4-week consideration period and speed up this particular SL1. So, members, are we agreed to note receipt of the SL1 and proposed statutory rule and to issue a call for views via survey, to publish the SL1, the draft SR and any relevant documents, and publish any responses after committee consideration? Members of the committee staff will liaise with the department. So first of all, we agreed to do all those things?
Yep, thank you.
Now, the committee staff will liaise, as is usual now with this process, with the department as necessary to inform the committee's decision on the SL1. And are we agreed to scrutinise this in a fortnight on the 29th of April, which is slightly ahead of the delegated legislation scrutiny framework, in order to allow the production of certificates to be expedited? Are we agreed with that, members, or do people want to?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Now, I'm going to bring in people to give their view. If anyone, Deputy Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and it's really welcome to see this coming through at a good rate. The Minister had said about May, June time, and it's looking like we're well on track for it, and it's good to see it coming through committee. But just in the interest of efficiency of what we would be looking at in terms of it, I was looking at the regulations, and I just am a wee bit concerned. It had came up through our evidence, it has came up through the process. So whenever you're on, it's page 160 of our pack, 159 into 160, it lists on it what all would be on the baby certificate, and it says it may contain the following particulars, and it lists all the things. I just would be keen to see an example of a template and a template of what may or may not be in it, because in terms of the sensitivities of it, it was discussed at length about how whenever it's quite an early pregnancy, you may not know the sex of the baby, not everybody's going to want necessarily to have a name. Like there's a lot of detail there that would be like the full certificate, but we had discussion about how if there was just one standard template and there were empty boxes, how that actually made people feel. So just in terms of, I know that this says these may contain these particulars, but just in terms of whenever it is being rolled out, and it has come forward at good pace, I just want to understand what would it look like, and were there going to be different versions of it where there's not just an empty box there. So just in terms of whenever we're looking at this going forward, could we maybe ask those questions as to, could we have sight of that?
Yeah, I think those are good questions.
I don't want to hold anything up or anything, but it's just when I'm looking at it, I can see that that's the list of it, but I'm just concerned sometimes you see, here's a list of what may be on it. So does a grid just appear, and then the unintended effect is there's empty boxes?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I suppose the regulations will need to give people the question will be, do people have the opportunity to effectively, at some point they will have to kind of, as it were, tick a box and say these are the things they want added to the certificate, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they should get, once they've indicated they want a certificate, get those back. If they haven't indicated they want to put those things in, they should. So that's a good question. Can we ask that?
I think, Chair, what we might want to do is bring officials up.
Yeah,
I can think of how electronically that could work, because members will have seen in surveys, if you answer a particular way, the survey will either contract or expand. So
it's just does it reformat the certificate, or does it, as the Chair says, like if you take what you want to put on it, quite often for other types of forms, you'll just get the same form but with boxes blank, and that's kind of my question.
Chair, if members are agreeable, we'll bring up officials and they will bring examples that we can say. I think that's just, we'll attempt to do that.
Yeah, I just think it's important because it's rolling out quite.
Yeah, I think that's a good. I think that given its importance, I think that might be the quickest way to clarify it. If we can have the register. Go ahead. Brian Kings.
Is our position that if the category isn't filled in, the category title shouldn't appear?
I think the first thing we do is ask them what their plan is, rather than us try and design it ourselves or express a view they hopefully have given more thought to this. So we'll do that. We'll bring them up, and hopefully it'll be a brief thing. But I think those are good points. So Agenda item 9 is the SL1 Government Resources and Accounts NI 2001 Estimate and Accounts Designation of Bodies Order. The purpose of this proposed statutory rule, this is a regular thing in front of this committee, where we have to list bodies whose spending must be included in government departments' budgets and financial accounts for the year ending 31st March 2027. We simply need to, this is simply updates, small notes. It doesn't actually say in here whether what the updates are, but anyway, members, there are page 32, a series of related papers. I won't run through them all. Should you wish to see them, but I will ask members if they're content with the proposed statutory rule. It's all page 32, the relevant papers. Are members content?
No responses, Chair.
No responses. This is very regular, and this is the most routine of routine things. Yeah. Are members content with the proposed statutory rule? Yeah. And we'll publish the committee's decision online. Now, agenda item 10 is a similar related issue. The department has formally laid statute. Sorry, I should give it its full title. It's the 2629. Is that 2649? Sorry, is that correct? 2649. The 2649 Government Resources and Accounts, Northern Ireland Act 2001 Estimate and Accounts Designation of Bodies Order. The department has formally laid the statutory rule, which has just been considered as an SL1, which will list certain public bodies whose spending must be included in government departments, budgets and financial accounts for the year ending 31st of March 27. The rule will be subject to negative procedure and come into operation on the 1st of April. It came into operation a fortnight ago on the 1st of April. The SL1 for this rule was subject to the new arrangements for scrutiny of delegated legislation. It was noted at the meeting of the 18th of March. A call for views was issued and there were no responses to our call for views. Accordingly, the committee agreed a fortnight ago that we were content to propose to support this proposed rule. There are various notes that begin at page 49 of the tabled pack. The examiner statutory rules has not drawn anything to our attention in relation to this. So, members, I'm just going to put the question: are members content with the proposed statutory rule? Yeah. And I will also put the question: the Committee for Finance has considered SR 49/2026, the Government Resources and Accounts Northern Ireland Act 2001 Estimate and Accounts Designation of Bodies Order 26, and has no objection to the rule. Content. So, great. Agenda item 11 is the pension is 2664, the Pensions Increase Review Order, Northern Ireland, 2026. Members, that's at page 168. The Department has formally laid this statutory rule, which provides for an annual increase in public service pensions in Northern Ireland. The rule is not subject to any Assembly resolution procedures. It's for noting only. So, members, it's to note. Now, we have 14. Yes, we're going on to performance and culture of NICS. So, members, I'm going to refer you to the meeting pack for the following papers relating to the NICS inquiry. A response from Social Enterprise NI, at page 451 of the meeting pack. A response from the Nevin Economic Research Institute, page 453. Response from someone at Queen's University Belfast at 454. So, members, these are all, I think, slightly, maybe surprisingly, nil responses to the committee's inquiry. Oral briefings have been confirmed for the 6th of May to be agreed under forward work programme. Also included at page 455 of the meeting pack is the Hansard transcript for the oral briefing with departmental officials on the NICS people strategy. So, members, are we agreed that we will add this to the evidence base for the inquiry in due course? Yeah, okay. So, agenda item 15 is correspondence. We have a little bit of correspondence to get through, but we are okay in terms of time. So, 15.1 is from the Justice Committee. It relates to the Criminal Justice Sentencing Bill, call for evidence. They've written to all committees. It's page 477 of the pack, by the way. Now, members, I will, if members are content, we will write to the department first of all to ask if it has any remit on provisions of the bill before we submit a response to the Committee for Finance.
Thank you.
And maybe the members may want to discuss even if the department gives us a nil return, members may think there's some other finance-related issue that they want to discuss, but the first step is to write to the Department of Finance. Okay, we're content, yes. Deputy Chair.
Just wondering, is there any opportunity, or maybe it's not the appropriate place, just to continue to make the reference about the civil law sitting within the Department of Finance?
I think potentially, yeah. I mean, I think it is a question, given the some of the issues around judicial and oversight, etc. Yes, Brian Kingston.
Just to declare that I'm a member of the Committee for Justice.
You have a lot to be getting on with then. Indeed. So 15.2 from the Committee for Executive Office relates to the Armed Forces Covenant. The Committee for the Executive Office has written to all of the departments asking what work they are undertaking in relation to the Armed Forces Covenant. So we've been copied into that, and that's to note. 15.3 is from the Communities Committee and it relates to assistance with fuel costs. We were copied into a memo from the Communities Committee regarding their letter to the Minister of Finance on a scheme to assist with fuel costs, and I would hope we will see the response when it issues. It's to note. 15.4 is from the Education Committee and it relates to the General Teaching Council Bill, call for evidence. It's at page 403 of the meeting pack. There's a memo from the Committee for Education on the call for evidence for the General Teaching Council Bill. The Committee for Education has written to all statutory committees seeking their views. We will, if people are agreed, write to the Department of Finance if it has any remit on the provisions of this bill before submitting a response to the Committee for Education. That's a bit of a delay, but that bill was introduced a while ago and it got second reading a while ago. It's quite strange that we're only getting the call for evidence now. But anyway, we will hear from the Department of Finance on that. 15.5, Financial Conduct Authority Work Programme and Perimeter Report. That's at page 485. It's to note, but obviously maybe relevant stuff in there for our upcoming follow-up hearing with the department on our banking, on our financial services report work. 15.6 is the Youth Assembly March 26 update. That's just a note. 15.7 is an invitation to an event from the Independent Autism Reviewer for Northern Ireland. That's at Monday, 27th of April, 12:30 in the Long Gallery. It's to note or attend if you should wish. That's all our correspondence members. Agenda item 16 is draft forward work programme. So next week we have a visit and an external meeting at Goodwood House. Zoom facilities are not available, so please indicate to the clerk whether you are not able to attend, obviously because it matters for quorum, because you can't dial in. Further details will issue in Friday's pack. The oral briefing from the Legal Services Commissioner scheduled for next week has been postponed until later in May, June. The Dallo indicates that I'm actually giving you to. I'm reading out your bits.
No, that's fine. You go ahead.
Well, you go ahead. I think
okay.
I'm enjoying.
So the Dallo has indicated that a written update. Members will recall the AO recruitment pilot undertaken by Talent Dog. Will be with us shortly. We've been waiting for that one for a while. Also, we want members to agree, Chair, if possible, schedule an informal meeting with the Bank of Ireland on cybersecurity and fraud. Members will recall discussing that before Easter recess. It will be done as an informal, potentially with the idea of opening it up wider to members more generally, because it's something that goes beyond the work of this committee, and members more generally might be interested in it. Also, we have the Pivotal and the UEPC up for oral briefings on the 6th of May on the inquiry. Not the UEPC, because they've said to us now that they're not coming. So we've got Pivotal up.
Yeah.
Public Administration.
And, oh, sorry, yes, what am I saying? It's not the EPC, it's the Centre for Public Administration at the UU. Sorry, I'm CPA. UUCPA, not UEPC. I'm so used to saying that one. Thank you, Tom. Mm-hmm. Probably you should have read that one out, Chair, because I'm getting it badly wrong.
It's easy that looks this gig.
It's so not. Well, kudos. And gender budgeting, we're looking at probably the 10th of June for that one. That's liaison between Rays and Queens on that, so we're looking at that sort of time scale.
And obviously we may have a couple of other additional things we have.
There's other things to be scheduled, Chair, for the inquiry as well.
Hawks is confirmed.
Hawks is confirmed. What's the date on that?
20th of May.
20th of May.
Hawks is confirmed the 20th of May. Okay, that's helpful. So members, if we're agreed, we will publish the forward work programme on the committee web pages. Okay. Now, that's that. Agenda item 17 is any other business. Does anybody have any other business? Okay, in that case, the date, time and place of the next meeting is Wednesday, 22nd of April at 2 p.m. in Goodwood House. And the visit to integrate, obviously also at Goodwood House, is from 12 noon and lunch will be provided. Further details will issue in the pack on Friday. I'll put the question that the committee do now adjourn. The committee is now adjourned.
Senate Chamber. Sound. 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 Senate Chamber. signed, Senate Chamber, 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 signed, Senate Chamber. Sound. 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 Senate Chamber. Sound.